What's going on, man? Welcome to the Under the Golden Dome podcast. I am Sean Davis. Each and every quarter, that's right, we're going to take three games, wait 3 games, and then we're going to do a show after each 3 games for the Notre Dame football team to talk about what's going on with the program. Today, we're going to preview the full season. We're going to have a special guest, Sports Illustrated Irish Breakdown, Brian Driscoll, sports analyst, editor over there. He's going to join us to preview the season for Notre Dame this year. They're going to start off this Saturday, 1:30 p.m. Central Time. You can hear that on ESPN 1000. We are the official carrier of Notre Dame football and Notre Dame sports right here in Chicagoland and the Chicagoland area. So you can check out the pregame beginning at 12:30. And that's going to go all the way through. Looking forward to hearing my guy Ryan Harris once again with the call on the radio side. And before we bring Brian in to talk about the Fighting Irish, I just want to talk about this college football season. It is crazy. COVID-19 has thrown everything into a flux. You have the Big 12, not the Big 12, but the Pac-12 and the Big 10 pushing back their seasons. They're looking to start them around Thanksgiving. So we don't know how this college football playoff is going to play out. Notre Dame is going to be playing a full ACC schedule. And I think other than Georgia Tech, once everything happened with conferences stepping back and not playing, especially the Big 10 and the Pac-12, Notre Dame and Georgia Tech, their schedules were definitely impacted. I would say both of their schedules got a little bit easier, those two ACC teams. So we did miss out on the USC-Alabama game to start the season as well. So looking forward to this season because I'm just happy to have football back. It was great to see the NFL get off to a good start. I might ask Brian about his Denver Broncos as well when we bring him in. But as I said before, the Under the Golden Dome podcast, we're here each and every quarter. That means 3 games, we come back and we do a show. Notre Dame plays another 3 games, and then we'll come back and do another show to cover those 3 games and forecast the next quarter of the season. So at this time, I would love to bring in my guest today. He is none other than Brian Driscoll from Sports Illustrated's Irish Breakdown. You can follow him on Twitter at Coach D178. Brian, welcome to the show.
Sean, my man, thanks for having me on, buddy.
Look, I want to jump right into this because this is something funny.
Let's do it.
Something funny we do all the time. We always take like the 2015 offense. And we had the 2015 offense, we matched it with the 2018 defense, or vice versa. This team would have been able to win a college football playoff. What is it going to take? Give me the one position that needs to be upgraded the most, offensively and defensively, for the Irish to get to that national championship caliber.
I think on offense, it's easy. It's quarterback. You know, okay. I think when you look at Ian Book, he's put up really good numbers. I mean, last year, Sean, you and I have talked a lot off the air about Ian Book and my thoughts on Ian Book, and I didn't think he played very well last year. I thought he had some big games against poor teams, and then you look at it at the end of the year, he still had over 3,000 passing yards. He still had over 500 rushing yards, and he still had 38 touchdowns.
Yeah.
There's a lot of quarterbacks that would love to not play well and put up that kind of production. So I've said this, if Ian Book can take his 2018 efficiency with his 2019 deep ball and running skills, that's one heck of a quarterback. And then the final key is, can he do it in the big games? The reality is Notre Dame's lost their last 3 games against Power 5 ranked opponents. And he hasn't played well in any of those games. So I think you look at college football, Sean, quarterback is really what dominates and drives championships, right? Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Tua coming off the bench with Jalen, Hurts, who's a pretty good quarterback himself. I mean, it's hard to win a championship without a great quarterback. Bama's the only team that's really been able to do it, and that's because they're elite everywhere else. So I think on offense, quarterback is a no-brainer. Defensively, I think it's right now, it's, looking at this particular team, I think it's corner for me is the big question mark. I think Notre Dame's front 7 is outstanding, should be outstanding this year. Talented, they've recruited well, linebackers loaded. I mean, there's guys that are going to be 3rd string at linebacker for Notre Dame this year that would start for half the teams they're going to play. And I'm not being hyperbolic about that at all. I'm being serious. Corner for me is the big question mark. Can Nick McLeod play national title caliber ball? He was a solid ACC player. Can he take that next step? can Tariq Bracy take that next step? And if one of those two guys doesn't pan out, now that Sean Crawford's at safety, who's that next guy? Is Cam Hart ready for prime time? So I think quarterback and cornerback really, to me, are where Notre Dame needs to take their program to another level from a production standpoint if they really want to compete for a national championship.
Yeah, is Sean Crawford some type of South Bend Terminator or something? Because it seems like we think the guy is done.
Yeah, I mean, he was on that 2015 team we keep talking about. Isn't that crazy? I mean, yeah, he's been around for a while. One of the Sean, you know, I'm on social media because I have to be. I'm not a huge fan of Twitter, but sometimes Twitter's awesome. Somebody put up the other day, Sean Crawford is to college football what Perry Ellis was to college basketball. It just seems like he's been around forever, and he really has. It seems like he has been on this team forever. I mean. But I mean, look, Sean, if you can't root for Sean Crawford, then there's something wrong with you. I mean, this is a young man that, you know, whether you think he's going to be a great player or not, you root for him because he's had to overcome so much adversity. And more importantly, he's done it with such class. I think that's the big thing is he's handled it all way better than I would have as an adult, much less as a college student. And you know, he's hopefully going to have that last chance to make an impact. The one thing we can say about Sean Crawford, when he's on the field and he's healthy, it's really good. It's just staying healthy for a whole season that's been the challenge for him.
Yeah, Brian Kelly in his press conference said that one of the freshman DBs is going to have to step up, especially at the corner position. Out of those guys and those new guys that came in to join the team, who do you think has the best chance to step up and make an impact?
Well, when Brian Kelly talks freshman, he's usually talking eligibility. So in my understanding of what Brian Kelly's talking about, he's talking about not just the true freshman like Clarence Lewis, who's in the 2 deep, but also the redshirt freshman like Cam Hart. And that's the guy right there for me, Cam Hart, that I've got my eye on. I've talked to sources. Sean, you saw my insider breakdown that I put up the other day, my insider nuggets that I put up at Irish Breakdown. Every time I talk to someone about the team, Cam Hart's name comes up. And usually when I don't even ask about him, it's just, you know, hey, how's so-and-so looking? And, oh, he's looking good, but, man, you should see, you know, Cam Hart. There's two guys that have been that way, Cam Hart and Isaiah Foskey. So there's a lot of optimism about Cam Hart maybe being that next guy that can really step up and solidify that depth chart. But I think after that, the two guys I have my eye on, because Crawford and KJ Wallace have now moved to safety, are Clarence Lewis, who's had a really good fall camp, and then Isaiah Rutherford. They need those two guys to really step up and provide depth at the cornerback position.
Yeah, now let's go to the guy that everybody is waiting. We talked about him. We heard about how he splashed in fall camp last year. We didn't know how much time he's going to get. And then we just saw how much better he got. They call him a ball hawk. He reminds me so much of the Earl Thomas types that we see in the NFL. I think he is the next great top 10 pick to come out of Notre Dame, and that's Kyle Hamilton at the safety position. Let's give a listen to Brian Kelly and his thoughts about Kyle Hamilton and how he's changed coming to his sophomore season.
Kyle Hamilton last year at this time. You guys know that. You know, he was a freshman that, you know, was emerging. And he certainly made a big splash early on, but, you know, he's physically much more mature. He has a presence about him. He even has exhibited leadership qualities already in just his second year here. I would say night and day would be the best way to describe Kyle Hamilton. Does that necessarily translate that, you know, he's going to be that much better of a football player? I don't know. We'll see what happens, but he certainly shows up in the scrimmages. He certainly shows up in 7-on-7. But I think off the field, physically, he's stronger. And he has a presence about him in our program, and in particular, showing, you know, strong leadership capabilities.
That's what I like to hear of a guy. You want your best players to have strong leadership capabilities. When we look at this kid, and we saw from him his freshman season, the ability to make plays, always to be around the ball. Of course, we saw mistakes. We saw him make assignment mistakes as he went throughout the season. But what's the ceiling for this kid?
I mean, I think you already said it, Sean. He's a top 10 caliber pick. I mean, when you combine, what are the things you need to be a great safety, right? You need great instincts. You need to be a high IQ football player. I think intelligence is the most underrated and underappreciated aspect of great safeties. You need to be rangy. You can be able to cover a lot of ground. He can do that. You need to be a guy in today's game. You have to be able to play the run and play the alleys just as effectively as you can play in man coverage and just effectively as you can play over the top. You have to have safeties that are versatile. And even as a freshman, Kyle showed that he can cover, he can play zone, and he can play the run. And I think the thing for me that gives him the ability to get to his ceiling maybe a little faster than I thought he would have just looking off film is you mentioned the mistakes he made as a freshman, and of course he made mistakes, but what you don't see from Kyle Hamilton is repeats of mistakes. He rarely makes that same mistake twice, and I remember even fall camp last year, he really struggled in coverage when playing in the slot. You could beat him on a corner route that first week at camp. By the time the first game of the season kicked off, you weren't able to beat him with those moves anymore. He was able to adapt and adjust and really develop his game. And that's something that I think the great players have, which is, yeah, you may beat me the first time, but you better hope you score on that play because you're never going to beat me on that play again. And neither's the next opponent or the next opponent. And that to me is the thing that really puts him over the top as a football player.
Yeah. That Notre Dame defense, 18th in total defense last year, 321 yards per game. 8th in yards per play. And then one of the stats that I love from Football Outsiders is DFEI. Their rating was 5th, which is really good, which basically they take the rating of that defense and they place it on a neutral field against an average college football offense. And they try to rank that. And they were 5th. I think they were right behind Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, and I think Auburn were the 4 teams that were in front of them right there in the DFEI. So, and that's what a lot of questions. The linebacker position was such a big question for Notre Dame defensively last year. We didn't know what was going on in the defensive backfield. We had just lost Julian Love at cornerback. And we're trying to say, what is Clark Lee going to do with this defense? And lo and behold, Clark Lee works his magic once again. Clark Lee has to be one of the top 3 defensive coordinators in all of college football. Underrated in my book. I feel like if he's in the SEC, he would be getting love and interviews for head coaching positions all over the place. But I'm glad he's underrated, under the radar, and I'm glad we have him as a defensive coordinator. Now that he has, I would say, a much more established linebacker core, a stud in Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who is a top 10 pick for a lot of people heading into the season. Do you think he gets a little bit more, I don't want to say dangerous, but creative with his coverages and does a lot more? Does he stay more simplified and just allow the talent and the experience that he has up front, especially in the front 7, to dominate teams?
I don't know if it's in his personality to get too creative. I think he's someone who we might see become a little bit more versatile and flexible with his defense from a personnel and alignment standpoint. But, he's one of those guys, what's allowed him to thrive so much in his first 2 years at Notre Dame, in my opinion, is the fact that he does trust his players. They coach him up. Hey, here's how you play. Here's the technique needed. And they very much fine tune what they ask them to do from a technical standpoint and a mechanical standpoint, that it's more about their execution of what they do as opposed to, let me show you how smart I am. I mean, Brian Van Gorder would have all types of different blitz schemes and coverages and all these different things, and they couldn't execute it. And so it didn't matter how much talent they had, they couldn't execute it. I think what makes Clark Lee such a great coach is, number one, he's going to put his players in position to be successful, and he's going to teach them how to play the game. So I think it would be smart to do a couple things. Number one, make sure that you're having Jeremiah Owusu and Kyle Hamilton on opposite sides of the field as much as possible. I think unless you want to force a team to go left-handed or right-handed. So I think how you use those two together is one thing that he can get real creative with, because you have to now pick your poison. Whereas if you have those two guys on the opposite side of the field or on the same side of the field, you could say, okay, well, we know where we're not going, so let's go attack this other player that's not in the same in the same area. And I think the other thing is, how do you take advantage of your linebacker depth? How do you utilize it either on first and second down? How do you utilize it in the nickel package to where you take the different strengths of all those players and you use it to attack teams on a week-by-week basis? I think those are a couple of things that I'm curious to see what he does this year. But when you look at the nuts and bolts of it, I just don't know if it's in his DNA. And I like this, actually. to be a super creative guy, because I think then that takes away from what I think he believes in, which is I need to let my players play as fast and as confidently as possible. And if they do that, then we're going to be really good because we have really good players.
Comparatively, is there a Notre Dame team? Because I look at this front seven at every position and I say to myself, you know what? It might not have the flash that other front sevens at Notre Dame have had, but this team is really solid at the two.
Mm-hmm.
Like going too deep. There's really it might be a minor drop off if the starter leaves at every position in the front seven, but I am really comfortable with everybody too deep in that front seven being able to come on the field and produce. And you can't say that about a lot of teams in college football.
No, you really can't. Even if you look at Notre Dame, Notre Dame's had a couple great defensive lines in their tenure. And you look at, for example, the 2012, which to me is the gold standard for Notre Dame when it comes to front seven play. You talk about flash. You had Manti Te'o, Heisman Trophy runner-up. You had Stephon Tuitt, Lewis Nix, Capron Lewis Moore. I would say that defensive line had a better starting unit. And you throw Brent Shimbo in there too. But there was a big drop-off between Lewis Nix and Tony Springman.
Right.
Or Kona Schwenke and Capron Lewis Moore, and then of course Sheldon Day coming off the bench, was a freshman at that time. Now where it's like, you're throwing waves at people, and we saw this last year. I mean, Dalen Hayes goes down. Oh, don't worry, Jameer Jones is going to be a good rotation guy. Okay, Julian Okwara goes down. Oh, don't worry, Adi Ogundeji is going to finish the season off like a beast. Oh, don't worry, Jameer Jones is now going to rush the quarterback. It's like, I even stopped. I'll be honest with you, Sean. By the fifth or sixth game of the year, I stopped paying attention to who was actually in the game on the defensive line. I really didn't. I mean, because normally, here's the second team's in there. Let's see if this team wants to try to establish the run, or if they're going to try to take a big home run shot now because Akwara's not in the game. You didn't have that. You just say, okay, well, they're going to pressure the quarterback, so let's see who's in their corner. Let's see who's in their linebacker. And I think that you're in a similar situation. Now, there's a little bit more unproven nature to this group from a pass rushing standpoint, but you also kind of look at it and say, well, the way that they've been able to replace Jerry Tillery and replace Dalen Hayes when he got hurt last year and replace Julian Okwara when he got hurt, you have a level of confidence in Clark Lee and Mike Ellison that they're going to be able to figure out how to get after the quarterback. And a guy that I'm interested to see early on is Isaiah Foskey, because I'm hearing a lot of things about him being that next great defensive end at Notre Dame.
I hear you talk about getting a championship caliber defense. There's one stat that stands out for you, and that's rushing yards per game.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not Notre Dame can ever get to that under 75 to 70 yards rushing per game, holding an opponent to that number. Is this front seven capable of that this year?
I think that number for me is adjusted a little bit the last 2 or 3 years, because you're seeing so many more of these teams run the ball more effectively. You're seeing the spread and the air raid is now becoming more balanced. We don't see as much of the Mike Leach throwing for 5,500 yards. You're now seeing teams like Oklahoma and Ohio State that can not only throw the ball effectively, but can run the ball effectively. I think for me, it's getting around to that 100-yard mark for me. I think this team is capable of it for 2 reasons. Number one is there's no Navy. So, like last year, for example, Notre Dame held Navy to 70 yards below their season average and still gave up 280 rushing yards. Well, if you take Navy off of the schedule the last 3 years, there's at least 10.5 yards that you take off of their season average. So that gets them down a little bit, but it's still not good enough. I think that the second thing that gives me confidence is when you look at how the run defense played late in the year. You take the Navy game out against Virginia Tech, Boston College, Stanford, Iowa State, and Duke. They held opponents to just under 100 yards per game. They were, I think, about 96.4, and that includes the BC game where they held BC to about 120 yards below their season average. Only gave up 128 rushing yards to BC. BC ended up averaging 250 yards a game.
Yeah,
they completely shut that offense down. They held Duke to under 100 yards. They held Stanford to under 100 yards, and I think they held Iowa State to under 50 yards in the bowl victory. So we started to see that run defense really dominate late in the year, and everybody is back from that unit with the exception of Khalid Kareem. But now you get back Dalen Hayes because Julian Okwara was down for most of that stretch. So I think this team has a chance to take that next step. and they're going to have to because Notre Dame plays some teams that are really effective and really good rushing teams this year. So they're going to need to be at their best.
More sacks this season, Dalen or Adi?
Adi. No brainer on that one.
Does he get the double digits?
I'll be surprised if he doesn't. I'll be a little disappointed if he doesn't, assuming he stays healthy. I think when you looked at how he played down the stretch, when they asked him to be more of a pass rusher, I think he showed that. And we even saw that in 2018. Remember when Julian Akwara got hurt in the Clemson game and he had to come out? It was a second half. I think it was a 9-3 game. Clemson's in field goal range. It's third down. They put Ogundeji in the game in the nickel package because Akwara had just got hurt, and he gets a big sack and knocks Clemson out of field goal range. So he's always had that ability. Late in the year, they kind of turned him loose, and they allowed him to get after it, and I think he really stepped up and was an effective pass rusher. And I also think Dalen's not always going to be used to rush the passer. That's the other thing. You know, the drop linebacker, especially with Dalen Hayes, who's such a good cover player, it's almost like if you rush him every time, you're not utilizing one of his strengths as a player as effectively. So I think it's also going to be more about opportunity. I think that Adi's going to get more opportunities, and he's more proven, where Dalen has never shown that ability to just turn it up and take over a game with his pass rush. Adi had like 5.5 sacks in the last 3 games last year. So he's a guy that I think could be he could do for the strong side end position what Julian Akwara did at the drop end position, which is really be someone who can take over a game as a pass rusher. Yeah,
Myron Tagovailoa, Mosa, and Kurt Hinish are just solid up the middle. Damian Franklin, and then you have Adamola, him playing that second unit. As I said before, when I asked you a question about what's the most important position, I thought you might say cornerback, but then I started to look at Clemson and the way they were able to have not great cornerbacks, but really good cornerbacks, and just be dominant and have those guys like Christian Wilkins at the defensive tackle position that just disrupted offenses week in and week out. And I thought to myself that your answer might be that stud defensive tackle that Alabama always seems to have. But the cornerback position, I can see where you were going with that. Now that I think about that stud cornerback is somebody that I think definitely would bode well strategically for Notre Dame, especially they always seem to be going up against great receivers, whether it's USC, whether it's Clemson, or whomever is on their schedule. They always have 4 or 5 weeks of seeing top-notch wide receiver tandems.
I think too, Sean, when you look at Clemson and you talk about what Clemson's been able to do without having great corners, well, I think when you look at like the 2016 Clemson team, they just outscored people. That was a team, if we remember, that gave up over 40 points and lost to Pitt. Yeah. You look at last year's Clemson team compared to the 2018 Clemson team. When 2018, they played an Alabama team that had a phenomenal offense, and everybody talked about one of the greatest offenses in modern history and all that. And we'll look what that defense did to them. Why? Number one, they harassed Tua all game long with their front four. Number two, you not only had A.J. Terrell, you also had Trayvon Mullen. So you had 2 NFL corners. Last year, you had A.J. Terrell, who's still very good, but you had to kind of protect that other corner. Darian Kendricks maybe got an NFL future down the road, but he wasn't that guy in 2019. And so when they got into that game against a team like LSU, it was harder for them to match up because you couldn't help AJ when he needed help because you had another guy on the other side that needed help, and you didn't have those 2 stud corners. So I think it got him in trouble because look, in today's game, Sean, the whole defense wins championship things is out the window.
Yeah.
I've said this before, defense will get you to the show, but your offense is now going to win you the championship. I mean, and you just look at the scores of championship games. The only championship winner that scored under 35 points, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, was the 2017 game when you had 2 SEC teams playing each other, which is just a different style of football. But, Clemson scored, I think, 35 and over 40 in their title wins. Ohio State scored over 40. I think they scored almost 50 in their title win. LSU obviously scored over 40 last year. You got to be able to score. And I don't care how good the other team's defense is. And great pass rush is important, but you have to have guys that can cover because as Notre Dame found out in 2018, when they had Julian Love and Troy Pride on the field together, Clemson couldn't really move the ball effectively. Clemson scored, I think, 2 touchdowns in another drive with Julian Love on the bench when he got hurt. When Notre Dame had their 2 stud corners on the field together, Clemson struggled to consistently move the ball. So I think cornerback play is so important in today's game. And I also think that you can better mask not having a stud 3 technique than you can not having a stud corner, because you can pressure, you can do different things to kind of protect that guy. It's harder to protect in the big games. It's harder to protect those corners. But I think Notre Dame could end up having that stud D tackle this year, because I really think Jason Adamiola is going to have a breakout season this year. I think he may not start for Notre Dame because, you've got the veteran Myron Tungavaloa-Mosa, but I could really see Jason Adamiola being their playmaker inside. I think that's what gives me so much confidence, is maybe they don't have that one first-round draft pick, but like we talked about with the whole defensive line, they can just throw waves at you.
Yeah.
Jacob Lacey and you've got Aiden Keanaaina. You've got Riley Mills as a freshman who's having a really good fall camp. I mean, they love what he's doing. Howard Cross is a guy the staff really likes. So they can go 4 deep at defensive tackle, whereas, Sean, it wasn't that long ago you could barely go 2 deep at defensive tackle for Notre Dame. So it's just a credit to Mike Elston. Keith Gilmore got it really going with that 2016 recruiting class. But Mike Elston, since he's returned to the defensive line coach, has just done a tremendous job of not just getting impact players, but getting depth. And that's what you see from the best teams in the country.
Now, I would say controversial. A lot of people talked about and reported on the story that supposedly Ian Book had issues with former offensive coordinator Chip Long, and he thought about leaving the program if Chip Long was coming back. I don't know how much truth is in that. I'm just saying it was reported. The rumors were out there. So Chip Long no longer the offensive coordinator with the program. Brian Kelly does an extensive search, according to him. According to him, I have to just say that. According to him, Irish fans. But I don't think it was a well-kept secret that the entire time most people around the program and close to the program pretty much knew that Tommy Rees would eventually get the job. He got the job. You were up front on Sports Illustrated and Irish Breakdown. Your concerns with Tommy Rees receiving the position. Do you still have concerns going into this first game and into the season? Or have you heard or seen anything during this fall camp that makes you say, you know what, he might be able to do, if not the same job that Chip Long was able to do, but he might be able to get more out of this offense?
Well, I think for me, they need someone who can do a better job than Chip Long did. And I think Chip Long did a very good job. I mean, Notre Dame averaged over 37 points per game last year in the regular season without an offensive line that played in the elite level, with a quarterback who played poorly against every defense with a pulse, and with a running game that, who were your runners that you were afraid of last year? And then you didn't have Cole Kmet the first 2 games of the year. So I think Chip did a good job, but the reality is in the big games, the offense couldn't get it done. And it's been that way since 2017. They couldn't get it done against Georgia. They couldn't get it done against Miami. They couldn't get it done against Stanford in 2017. They scored 3 points against Clemson and missed a lot of opportunities where they should have made more plays. It's not all coaching. It's just the Chip Long will be the first one to tell you, I'm the offensive coordinator, so we don't get it done. It's on me. He'll be the first person to tell you that. And then, of course, last year against Michigan and Georgia, they couldn't get the job. I mean, think about it, Sean. If I'd have told you before the Georgia game that Notre Dame will get the ball back with 2 minutes left, down 6 with the ball at midfield, you'd have probably felt pretty good about it. And they couldn't even get a first down.
I would disagree with you because of the conversations we have. I tell you all the time, but situations like that, for some reason, I just don't have the same faith that others have.
Well, it's because they haven't shown it. Right.
Big time situation. But I was here running the board and producing that game when they played Georgia that night. And when Notre Dame got the ball back, I would probably say my confidence was about 25%.
At the stadium, I kind of felt the same way. My whole thing is, when you look at it, when you think of a team that's going to be a championship caliber team, my point is you get the ball at midfield with 2 minutes left on the road, down 6.
It's money.
You got to win those games. Well, Notre Dame hasn't proven to be able to win those games. And they did against Virginia Tech. But my whole thing is Virginia Tech's not very good. And if they would have played in the first 3 quarters against a team like Clemson or Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State, the way they did against Virginia Tech, they never would have had a chance to come back and win it at the end.
Yeah.
But and that's okay. So for me, there's nothing Tommy Rees can do during fall camp that's going to tell me that Brian Kelly made the right decision at the right time. he's going to have to go out and show it. And honestly, he's not going to show it against Duke. He's not going to show it against Wake Forest and South Florida. It's going to, can you do it against Florida State, Louisville, Pitt, North Carolina, and of course, Clemson? I mean, those are the games where Notre Dame hasn't been where they need to be. It's their offense just has, I think, has averaged about 13 points a game against top 15 opponents in the last 3 years. And you could even go back to the 2015 season with that great offense. They played terrible in the first half, fell way behind Clemson, and couldn't get it done at the end. Same thing against Ohio State. Just the offense couldn't play to the level it needed to play to compete with an elite team. So you're now asking Tommy Rees at 28 years old, as bright as he is, with 3 years of coaching experience, to go toe-to-toe with Brent Venables. That's a tough ask. And if I'm wrong, that's great for Notre Dame. But my whole thing was not anything against Tommy Rees, because I think Tommy Rees he's probably one of the 2 or 3 smartest 28-year-olds in college football. But do you go with a guy like that or a Joe Moorhead, who I think we could argue is equally as intelligent, but has the experience of coaching on that level and coaching in those big games? And that was my whole argument all along, is Notre Dame has a Ferrari on offense this year from a personnel standpoint. And you just gave the keys to the Ferrari to your 16-year-old is kind of the way that I look at it. Now, maybe Tommy Rees is an advanced 16-year-old in this type of situation, and I hope that he is, because it's good for my business and it's good for me when Notre Dame is good and they win. And I think I've never hid the fact that I grew up a Notre Dame fan, so I would very much enjoy it. I always love being wrong when I don't think someone at Notre Dame can do something. I hope Jeff Quinn proves me wrong. I hope Jeff Quinn has a phenomenal year coaching the offensive line, and I feel the same way about Tommy Rees, but my job is to be objective, and objectively, I don't see Clemson or Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia hiring a 28-year-old, however smart he is, to be that offensive coordinator that you give it a guy that has 5 starting returning offensive linemen and a 3rd-year starting quarterback. And so that was kind of my issue, was just the timing of it. I felt like if you'd brought in Joe Moorhead, let him coach for 2 years, and then in 2 years he leaves to become a head coach, and you hand the keys to Tommy Rees, great, go for it. I'd love to see Tommy Rees be successful. I just don't know if the timing of it was more of my issue.
You know what, man? That was a great way to explain. Giving the 16-year-old was Tommy Rees the keys to this Ferrari or this sports car. I just hope that the Notre Dame defense doesn't end up being the insurance policy because he keeps having fender benders. Like, you keep putting them in a position to bail you out. Because your offense is sputtering. And we always said, in order to be a championship team in our conversations, you have to get to that 40 points a game mark. That's what Clemson does. That's what Alabama does. That's what great offenses do. They get to 40 points a game, which pretty much assures that once you face a good offense, your ability to score 30 plus in a championship game and big time games, which Notre Dame hasn't been able to do, is, it makes you feel a little bit better about that offense going up against those tough teams and tough defenses. Now, you said something, and I want you to be able to elaborate on this, and then you can get back to what you were about to say. One of the things you said there, you said that this offense is a Ferrari. One of the things that got me excited in the offseason, listening to Brian Kelly talk about his team, is him talking about Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree. Like, our top 2 running backs haven't been electric in a long time. We've had one electric guy, maybe one half electric guy, and another one that's a bruiser. I love Tony Jones. What he did for this team last year was vitally important. The big games he had, the big runs he had against tough opponents, fighting injury. Jafar Armstrong has just been frustrating, just not being able to be on the field. We keep hearing how many plays he can make, not only in the backfield, but out of the backfield in the passing game. We're just never able to see it because he can't stay on the field. But I'm excited to see what Chris Tyree and Kyron Williams can give to this offense, because it sounds like big play possibilities like we've never, and since Jamal Adams probably, that big season he had, big play possibilities from the running backs.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at what happened. The 2015 running back tandem to me was Notre Dame's best when you look at CJ Prosise and Josh Adams. The problem with that team, however, was they never used them together.
Yeah.
Josh Adams, CJ Prosise went for over 1,000 yards. Josh Adams set a Notre Dame freshman rushing record with 835 yards. But Josh Adams had some mop-up duty yards. He had like over 100 yards against UMass. He had 5 carries against Texas. 2 of them went for touchdowns, but like there were games he had 1 carry. You know, he came against USC, for example, rips off a 26-yard run, and we don't see him again.
Yeah.
It wasn't until Procise got hurt that they then went to Josh Adams and he ripped it up, right? So it's that excitement of that 1-2 punch that I think brings some excitement. 2017, I thought we might get it, but Dexter Williams kept getting banged up, you know, and struggled to stay healthy. And so, you know, and now you throw out a guy like a Chris Tyree, who Josh Adams tested at like 4.48. Dexter Williams was a 4.5. This is a kid who's a low 4.3. You talk about if Notre Dame's offensive line is as good as we think it should be and could be, he's the kind of kid that doesn't need much of a crease to go 80, to go 90. And when I think of that 2015 running back group, you had 2 different running backs go for over 90 yards that year in on a play. Remember, CJ had one of 91 yards against Georgia Tech.
Right.
And then Josh Adams had one of 98 yards against Wake Forest. So when you talk about Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree, it's 2 guys that bring that big playability. Now, obviously, Kyron doesn't have Chris Tyree's speed, but who does?
Yeah.
You know, and so it brings some excitement, but also some excitement. It's not just runners. These are guys like you said. I could see Kyron Williams making a game-changing play on a wheel ride. To me, he brings a lot of Tony Jones to the table, that ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. I mean, some of Tony's biggest plays in his career were catches. I remember the 2018 game against Vanderbilt when Notre Dame was really struggling and Brandon Wimbush hit Tony on a wheel route for a big play that set up a score. So I think Kyron brings some of that, but I think Kyron has a little bit more juice than Tony had. I think he's got a lot more juice than Tony had. And of course, you combine that with Chris Tyree, you have a chance for this running back group to be really good. But it really is going to depend on, can the big guys up front be as good as they're supposed to be?
You talk about the big guys up front. Here's my hot take. Notre Dame getting back. They were very good in pass protection last year, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Running the ball, being able to establish 3 or 4 yards down the field for those running backs. I felt like our running backs were getting hit either in the backfield or right at the line of scrimmage all season long, no matter who they played. But I'm going to step out on a limb and say the Notre Dame offensive line is going to be better because I truly believe that Jared Patterson has vastly improved. And anytime you have a stud center, that usually leads to that inside or that interior offensive line being able to get a push, because I believe in our tackles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I already believe in our tackles. Jared Patterson and that offensive line, how much better will they be in the run game this year?
You know, I think a lot of people are talking about Jared Patterson's improvement, and that's going to be big because as you, Sean, you're a football guy. You know this. Yeah. If you get beat right up the middle, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, the centers and the guards are by far the 2 biggest positions on this offense that need to step up this year. I thought Jared Patterson was pretty good, really good last year as a pass blocker. But like most redshirt freshman linemen, he just didn't have the ability to go move people. And I think the fact that the guards didn't play very well either hurt him and made him look even not as effective as he actually was at times. So I think the guards stepping up, and then, of course, like you mentioned, Jared Patterson taking that next step from a physicality standpoint are going to be the keys to this season. But I think the name that is not getting talked enough about that I think could have a big impact on this team is Chris Watt. And when you talk about bringing him in as a graduate assistant, this is a guy that the players wanted to be around the team. They went to Brian Kelly and said, hey, we want to work with him, and they brought him in. And kudos to Brian Kelly for listening to his players, and kudos to Jeff Quinn for not having too much of an ego to say, hey, no, I'm the offensive line coach. Say, hey, look, this is a smart young guy. He would be playing in the NFL if it wasn't for injuries. You know, this is a guy that played for Harry Hiestand, and let's let him work with these guys. And so it's like, if you can get some of Chris Watt's mentality onto the talent. Could you imagine how Chris Watt would have been if he had Aaron Banks' body or Tommy Kramer's body? Yeah. I mean, think about that. So if you can get them to start to adapt some of his mental toughness, physical toughness, that fight, that step and drive into contact, if they can adopt some of that personality, and I know that he still has a relationship with Harry Hiestand, so I know there's that influence. That's, to me, where this offensive line could really see that big jump, Sean, because talent has never been the question. It's, can they play in the run game with the force needed? Because you'd see it last year. They'd come up off the line, they'd step, and they just let the defense come to them. and it was a real passive type of mentality. If they go back to that, to really driving off the ball, they're going to be a dominant defensive line. And like you were talking about the two running backs, those guys don't need that big of a crease.
Right.
And the other part that you mentioned is really on point that people need to understand is when you catch a defensive line, a lot of times you're now forcing the running back to make cuts sooner than he would rather do. What made Josh Adams so good is he in 2017 is the line would get such a push that he could attack his track and stay downhill and then make that cut, at the last second to find that crease. Well, last year Tony Jones was having to make cuts 2, 3, 4 yards in the backfield. Once the running back makes that first cut, he's now declared, here's where I'm going. And the linebackers and the safeties can rally to the ball. Josh Adams at times in 2017 wasn't making his first cut till he was 2 yards downfield because the line had pushed the defensive line so far downfield, he could make those cuts. So if you just kind of get somewhat close to what that 2017 team was as far as getting a push, then I think you're going to see some big time running plays, because here's the one thing this team will have that the 2017 didn't have is if you try to load the box against this offense, Ian Book will destroy you. And that's what that 2017 team didn't have. And Ian Book's no slouch as a runner either.
Before we get to the Duke game, Ben Skoranek transfers to Northwestern. When I heard the news, I said, "Oh, he was really good with Northwestern before he got injured, but he's probably going to be third or fourth on the depth chart." That's my mindset. I'm like, we got Kevin Austin, we got Javon, Braden Lindsey. He's going to be a star. He's going to be the guy that's going to stretch the field, be in a position like Will Fuller. And all of a sudden, this guy comes in, establishes himself. Brian Kelly said he buys into the culture, not just on the field, but even in the weight room, to get himself healthy and get himself in shape to be able to go out there and from the looks of the depth chart, maybe be the main receiver. Spent time with Ian Book in the offseason consistently, and that's the buzz we're hearing. But should I be concerned that he ended up being that guy coming into camp and coming into the program just this year with the talent we already had? Should I be concerned about the talent that was already here?
I don't know if it's as concerned about the talent's already here as much as it's concerned about Brian Kelly and his desire to have a specific type of player on the field, whether it be from a culture. I mean, look, culture's great. I like guys that buy in, but I'm also, what I like more than guys that buy in? Guys that make plays.
Yeah.
And Ben Skoranek's a good kid, solid player. When they signed him, I said, as long as they use him correctly as like a guy that moves around as a rotation guy, it's a great pickup. My fear at the time was that because he's a veteran and he's, proven, that you would see a situation where they would try to put him into a role that his skill set was not capable of getting to. And that's my fear. Now, maybe it's because of injuries. Kevin Austin's already injured. It could be a situation where maybe Braden Lindsey missed some of fall camp. We don't know because we weren't at any of the practices. Maybe there's some banged up guys, and that's why Ben Skoranek is playing where he is. I hope that that's the case, because I hope it's not a situation where Brian Kelly thinks Ben Skoranek is all of a sudden going to come to Notre Dame and be in the same league as a Miles Boykin or Chase Claypool, playing that boundary position, which is where you put your dude. I mean, that's the boundaries where they put their dude the last 2 years. If you think he's going to be that guy, I just don't see that happening.
Let's go and let's talk about this Duke game. A lot of people think Notre Dame is going to blow them off the field. Favored by 20.5 points. The over-under is at 53.5. I'm personally going to take that over because I think Notre Dame is going to put up close to 40. And that might be dangerous because the Notre Dame defense might get nasty and hold Duke to under 10.
Mm-hmm.
The last time Duke was in South Bend, I know you remember this, because the day after was probably one of my favorite days ever. They come in, Notre Dame goes up 14-0, and Duke comes back and wins 38-35. David Cutcliffe gets the win here in not here, but in South Bend. And the next morning, Brian Van Gorder is fired. And that for me was like, yes, get him out of here, which opened the door for him to bring in eventually Clark Lee as a defensive coordinator. And they have a quarterback graduate transfer, comes in from Clemson, Chase Bryce. People probably remember him from the game where Trevor Lawrence got hurt against Syracuse early in the game. And it might have been Trevor Lawrence's first start, if I'm not mistaken. And he gets hurt early in the game. Syracuse goes up, and Chase Bryce brings them back. The majority of the time, he was handing the ball off to Travis Etienne, but he did make a big fourth down conversion and a couple other big throws in that comeback victory for Clemson. But he's the quarterback for Duke, and they have a lot of holes. And one of the things I saw last year in Notre Dame's victory at Duke that I saw was that offense for Duke just didn't have the playmakers that it had in previous years. You know, when they had Daniel Jones at quarterback, he had a lot of great, quick wide receivers in the program that he was able to make plays and make. They came up here, and I think they wiped the floor with Northwestern when they were underdogs that year, and they had a really good year. I just don't think this team can come in the South End and put up much of a fight, even with everything being sporadic in practices and COVID-19. Brian Kelly was asked about Notre Dame having to go to e-learning for 2 weeks, hasn't impacted the team. And I just don't see anything that's going to stop Notre Dame from having a comfortable victory on Saturday.
You know, the thing about Notre Dame having to do e-learning and COVID and all the impact is everyone's being impacted by that, right?
Absolutely.
So anyone that's using that as an excuse is just basically looking for an excuse. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to who has the better team, who has the better preparation, and who has the better leadership and all those other kind of things. So after watching Duke last year, I can understand why you would say what you said. I just personally feel that when I look back at some of these players like Deion Jackson, for example, and I look at how he played in 2018 with Daniel Jones, a quarterback, over 800 yards rushing, 5.3 yards per carry. And then I look at how bad their quarterback position was last year. When I break down the film, you'll see guys open down the field. And Quentin Harris just couldn't get it to him. I was watching the Virginia Tech game, which they actually won convincingly last year, Duke did. And Noah Gray, their tight end, who I think is a good football player, he's wide open in the end zone, and the quarterback short hops it. I mean, it's just like, that's a touchdown if Ian Book's the quarterback, or even if Chase Bryce is the quarterback. So I think skill-wise, I think Duke could give Notre Dame some problems early. I do. I think they have enough skill talent on offense if Chase Bryce is able to get comfortable to do some damage early. I think their defensive line is good enough and their secondary is good enough to where I think Notre Dame could come out and just run them off the field. But if Notre Dame doesn't come out and immediately do that, I'm not going to be too concerned about it because I do respect the talent Duke is bringing in from a skill position standpoint. But if this Notre Dame offensive line is as good as it should be and as good as I think you and I both think it should be, by the middle of the third quarter, I think Notre Dame should start running them off the field. Yeah. Because I don't think Duke has the depth of talent to really compete with Notre Dame for 60 minutes. If it's a little closer going into halftime, then maybe we might think. I'm not going to be surprised by that. And we may see Notre Dame have some of those first game kinks that you have to work out that happen every year, whether there's COVID-19 or not. I think once you get through the first game, those things should kind of be worked out because now you're on a regular schedule. But I agree with you. I think Notre Dame is going to win this game convincingly. I actually predict them to cover the spread of 20, but I don't think it's always going to look like the domination that we saw last year, simply because I do think with a better quarterback, you're going to see the skill that is there flourish a little bit more. But I think Notre Dame's ability to win in the trenches is going to ultimately determine why I don't think this is going to be a competitive game by the time we get to the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and keeping my own mistake score sheet, the previous question, I meant to say Josh Adams. I said Jamal Adams.
Hey, he's pretty good too. He could probably be a good running back.
Playing well. And the name I was looking for after Brian Van Gorder before we got to Clark Lee was Mike Elko, of course, who left Notre Dame to go down to Texas A&M as defensive coordinator. So, my friend, does this season for Brian Kelly, Ian Book, and Notre Dame come down to Clemson and North Carolina?
I think it comes down to Clemson. I think, yeah. I mean, look,
Clemson twice. Are you saying Clemson twice?
I think it comes down to Clemson twice. I look at it like this, Sean. With all due respect to Clemson, I was a lot more concerned about playing at USC than I am about at Clemson or at North Carolina. Excuse
I
me.
can agree with you and explain to people. People probably think you're crazy, and we're crazy for feeling that way. But please explain to people why that USC, and I said this, that USC wide receiver core scared the living bejesus out of
No question. And look, I think the biggest thing for me is there's two things. Number one is you're going into year 2 of Graham Harrell's offense, which is going to be a positive. And number two, Clancy Pendergast was a mediocre at best college defensive coordinator. He wasted a lot of talent at USC. They hired Todd Orlando in the offseason. Now, Todd Orlando's not, it's not like hiring Clark Lee, but that's an upgrade.
Yeah.
Big time upgrade. And you just look at the talent level of that team, they were going to be dangerous. If they were either going to be like 4-7 and ready to just quit, or they were going to be a team you just didn't want to play late in the year. And that's the thing, is you didn't know what they were going to be. But even 2 years ago when USC was 5-6 and playing a true freshman at quarterback, they were beating Notre Dame for half the game. And that was a 11-0 Notre Dame team. So USC was going to be dangerous. And North Carolina is a nice, solid team. They've got some really good skill talent. I love their quarterback, Sam Howell. But if Notre Dame in year 11 of Brian Kelly's tenure and year 4 now of the post-2016 makeover can't beat North Carolina, then what are you doing here? What are we doing here? It comes down to Clemson, and it comes down to what you do in the postseason. Like I said, Brian Kelly's in year 11. This is year 4 of the post-2016 makeover. It's time, right? Notre Dame hasn't beaten a team that finished in the top 10 since 2013. And they haven't even been competitive in a lot of those games.
Yeah.
You've got an opportunity now to probably play Clemson twice, barring some crazy disaster where they lose a second game because 75% of their roster's out with COVID-19 or something like that. Clemson's only going to have at most one loss in the regular season. So Notre Dame has to either beat them in the regular season and be competitive with them in the ACC title game, or lose at home in a competitive situation to Clemson and then beat them in the ACC title game. But you have to now show you can compete and beat those teams. You're going to get 2 cracks at it this year, most likely. You're going to get 2 cracks at it. You have to win at least one of them, and you have to at least be competitive in the game you lose. And then what do you do the next level? Whether it's getting to the playoff again, and now you got to win a game, or is it going to the Orange Bowl and playing a Florida or a Georgia, a really good SEC team, and winning that game?
Yeah.
And if Brian Kelly can't do it now, in year 11 and year 4 of post-2016 makeover, with 5 returning offensive linemen and a third-year starting quarterback that he thought so highly of that they basically chased Phil Jurkovec off campus, with a experienced front 7 coming back, with an elite group of front 7 players, in my opinion, with veterans in the secondary and an elite safety, with coaches you handpicked, when is it going to happen? So yeah, I think this needs to be the year that Notre Dame finally kicks down that door and does what a program that like Notre Dame should do. And if he can't do it this year, I think you have to start asking yourself, is this the best it is going to be under Brian Kelly, which is still pretty good, but Notre Dame is still a program that should always be about, can you win a national championship?
Yeah, you talked about Phil Jurkovec transferring to Boston College, and I know both of us were fans of the kid and thought he should be given a shot. And recently, Jordan Jim Markeith decided to transfer as well. Quick question with that position, because that Buck position was the unknown, I guess, trying to see who would start there. Shane Simon, chances of him becoming a stud.
I mean, I think anyone that starts at linebacker for Clark Lee has a chance to become a stud. I mean, look, you talked about last year when we were wondering, like, how's the linebacker going to be? Well, I thought Drew White could be a solid player. My big concern was Asmar Bilal. I didn't think Asmar Bilal could play.
Did you offer an apology to Asmar?
Oh, many times. Many times. Like I said to you earlier, when I say a Notre Dame player or coach is not good or can't do something, I enjoy watching them prove me wrong. And I enjoyed watching Asmar prove me wrong last year. And now you look at him, he just made the practice squad for the Chargers.
Yeah.
And, this is a guy that I just felt like never knew how to, couldn't make reads, was often out of position. He always had physical tools, but I was like, how's this guy going to play buck linebacker, which is arguably the most important linebacker position on the team? And the first game of the year, I'm like, yep, see, I was right. He played terrible against Louisville. And then over the next couple games. He started getting better. Really, I thought played well against Georgia. And then by the end of the year, you're like, this kid's really good.
Yeah.
So if you can get Osmar Bilal to play to that level, then a guy like Shane Simon, who was a top 100 recruit, or Maris Lufau or Jack Lamb or whoever they put there, at this point in time, I don't care who plays the position. I expect that guy to be a playmaker. And Shane Simon's always had the physical tools. His issues were a lot like what Osmar went through. Well, now he gets his opportunity to shine, and we're going to see if he can do it. But I think he's certainly capable of it. He's an extremely talented young man. But the other part of it too, Sean, is the depth there is so great that you don't necessarily need one guy to be the stud. You can kind of mix and match the different skill sets of the different players to get what you need out of that position. And I think it'll be smart to do that. I think this is a year, because of the way that COVID-19 is, and you could find out on a Friday that you're going to not have 8 guys. I mean, that's just how crazy this whole thing is. It would behoove a lot of these coaches, and especially Notre Dame, who has kind of been almost kind of like allergic to playing young players or playing a lot of players. It would be smart for you to play as many players as possible, including in early snaps, much like Clemson does, much like Ohio State does, just to make sure that the first time you need Jordan Johnson's not going into the Clemson game or the Pitt game or the Florida State game. Give these guys those opportunities, because you never know, injuries, COVID, however the case may be, you never know when someone's number going to be called. So I hope that we see a lot of linebackers playing early for that reason, number one. But number two, November is going to be tough. Yes. You've got Clemson, you've got Boston College on the road, you've got North Carolina on the road. You need to be as fresh as possible when you play those teams, and giving other players an opportunity to kind of rotate in and get their feet wet not only prepares you to handle things from a depth standpoint, but it's going to take some of that wear and tear off your starters once you get into November.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the breakout stars of the season for both sides of the ball. You gave me, without me going into it, you already gave me Jason Ademola on the defensive side. You mentioned Jordan Johnson, the freshman. Is he a candidate to be a breakout star in 2020?
No, he should be, but I don't think he will be. I think Notre Dame, as we've seen for a long time, they just don't like playing young receivers unless they have to. For whatever reason, he only knows this part of the playbook, or he's not maybe thriving in school, or whatever the excuse may be. So I don't know if he's going to get that opportunity to really be a breakout star. I think the guy for me, if you want to go a breakout of someone maybe we haven't talked about in the past, you go with Kyron Williams. But I think a guy that I expect to have a big-time breakout year is Tommy Tremble. I think Tommy Tremble has a chance to be one of the nation's best tight ends. He's up to over 250 pounds. He had a little bit of a banged up knee, nothing major in fall camp, but he's back and healthy. You talk about just the modern tight end, a 6'3", 250-pound kid that runs a 4.6, maybe even faster than that, now that he's 3 years removed from that knee injury he had. A guy that was Notre Dame's best blocking tight end last year as a 235-pounder. He's got a chance to be a star. And if you look at from a production standpoint, Cole Kmet, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. I think Cole Kmet in 2018 as a sophomore had 15 catches for about 162 yards, no touchdowns. Last year, Tommy Tremble, as a true sophomore, had 16 catches for about 183 yards and 4 touchdowns. We saw what Cole Kmet turned into year 3. A bona fide stud at tight end and a second-round draft pick, the best tight end in the country. I think Tommy Tremble can make a similar leap, except now he won't have, number one, have to have Chase Claypool taking some of his targets away like Cole had, because Cole had another stud out there. You imagine what Cole Kmet's numbers would have been if Chase Claypool wasn't so good. Right. And I think we're going to see some of that with Tommy Tremble this year, where he is going to be the guy and everybody else is kind of complimenting him. I could certainly see that being the scenario. And honestly, it needs to be the scenario, because of anyone that they have a receiver, the one guy that has a chance to be a star, to take over games at this point in time, to me, is Tommy Tremble.
And just so Irish fans know, just to give them a sneak peek, Cole Kmet is in camp wrecking havoc from all over here, especially in the red zone.
Yeah,
they're very happy with what the kid has been doing in fall camp. So watch him against the Lions on Sunday. Trubisky might be looking for him in the red zone. And you already talked about it. San Diego Chargers seem to love our linebackers.
Love Notre Dame players.
Linebackers.
Yeah, and it was funny when Cole Kmet got drafted by the Bears. A lot of people said, why would you draft a tight end when you have so many guys on the roster? And my response was, because he's better than everybody else they have on the roster.
Better than every tight end they have. And he's better than the veteran they brought in Jimmy Graham.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think you're going to be able to see that full display. We talk about the Chargers. let's sneak over to the NFL.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your Broncos. Are you happy? I know you're happy with the draft.
Oh, I love their draft. I think, John Elway, one of the things, John Elway, when he first took over, did a great job with like getting those veteran free agents, bringing in Peyton Manning and DeMarcus Ware, but he struggled with the draft outside of Von Miller. Really struggled with the draft. The last couple of years, I think he's figured some things out, and I love how they've been drafting. So I love the speed they brought in. I love the Jerry Jeudy draft pick. That was kind of also luck, because there was talk they could trade into the top 10 to get Jerry Jeudy, and they sat still and got him. It's kind of like the year before when they traded down from 10 to 20 and got Noah Fant, who they wanted anyway. They were thinking about taking it, where it was like 10 or 11. And then there were some people that thought they would take Drew Lock in the first round, and then they didn't. And then they get him in the second round. So they've also had some luck. But, the bad luck is obviously you just lost Von Miller for the year. Bradley Chubb isn't healthy. So that's the one concern I have is, that the ability to get pressure on the quarterback. That's a big part, of Coach Fangio's defense.
Yeah.
And there's the corner was not expected to be a great strength of the team. It's not bad, but now you lose your elite pass rusher. I think that creates some concern. And now you're putting a lot of pressure on your second-year quarterback who's only got, I think, 4 career starts. Now you're asking your young offensive players like Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant to really step up and maybe be a little better earlier on, carry you, I should say, more early on than you would have otherwise expected them. So I think that would be that concern. I really felt like Denver could make a playoff push this year. I think that might be a little harder now without Von Miller. But their offense is going to have to grow up in a hurry. And if it can, and they can kind of weather this early September storm without Von Miller and with Bradley Chubb still not 100%, if they can weather that and maybe go 2-1, then maybe you could be in a situation where when they finally get back to being somewhat healthy, they could make a run at the division, because I think it's a winnable division. Or it's not a division. I think the wild card is very achievable for them, because the Chiefs are the class of the AFC, but I think the wild card is very achievable for them. The Chargers are not a great team. The Raiders are still not a great team. So I think Denver can certainly be in position to do that if they can have a little bit of luck on their side when it comes to a good health and some younger players, especially some younger defensive linemen, really stepping up and maybe picking up some of that slack they lost with Von Miller going out.
Under the Golden Dome podcast, as I said before, we're going to be with you each and every quarter. That's right. 3 games, the next show, the next 3 games, and then the next podcast. So we'll see you after the Wake Forest game right before the Florida State game this season. But once again, you can follow us under the Golden Dome. We're always right here, Facebook Live, StreamYard, and also on Periscope. You can follow me on Facebook at Sean Marcel Davis, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at SD2Mikes. Also follow the network A2S Pod 1 on Twitter and Instagram as well. Brian Driscoll, why don't you give the Irish fans a little bit more information about Sports Illustrated and Irish Breakdown and all the great stuff you guys have going over there this season?
Well, obviously, we've got Steve Berline, former Notre Dame quarterback and 17-year NFL vet, is now working with Irish Breakdown. So he's providing analysis, and it's our content package has been completely revamped this year. But it's going to be a lot of the stuff that I always do, Sean, which is just diving into film and diving into analysis a lot deeper than really what you're going to find anywhere else. And the thing that I love about what we're doing is, we've got great rates right now. If you go to irishbreakdown.com, you pay $5.99 a month or $59.99 a year. You get all of our premium content. You get access to premium content for your favorite NFL team in the SI Maven network. Plus, you get a free subscription to Sports Illustrated, the magazine. So, and that's our rate. So it's not a deal where if you pay $5.99 now or $59.99 now, when your subscription runs out, we're going to double your rate because it's a special you're getting into. This is who we are. This is our rate. And Sean, I think the content we provide is definitely unique, and I think it's the best. And if it's not the best, we're going to keep working to make sure that it is. But it's certainly unique, and you're certainly going to get a level of analysis and really breaking down the film that I don't think you're going to get anywhere else.
And I would concur, and I have signed up, and I have enjoyed a full summer worth of content that has gotten me ready for this Irish Notre Dame 2020 football season. So for all you fans out there, continue to follow us. We will be having things. You'll always see me on Twitter, Instagram, retweeting everything that Brian posts. And I'm looking forward to the film breakdown of this victory over Duke. Once again, you can catch it on ESPN 1000 right here in the Chicagoland area. Pregame starting at 12:30, taking you right up to kickoff at 1:30 Central Time. Notre Dame as they welcome the Duke Blue Devils into South Bend. For Brian Driscoll, my privileged friend and guest,
Absolutely.
honored, not privileged, but honored friend and guest this week. We thank you so much for joining us. And as always, go Irish.